Good morning, my friends. This is Grandpa Bob from Tell Me a Story, Grandpa. And today's story about the old times is about dangerous washing machines. Now, back in the old days when I was a boy, my mother had a agitator wash machine of the old type, and it was a really old one. It had a gasoline motor instead of an electric motor, and it had a pedal on it that you would press down on with your foot, something like a motorcycle, to start the motor. And it was a gasoline powered motor, very powerful, and it had a transmission in the wash machine, and out of the side of the wash machine was a lever, the gear shift, and you would shift it to low if you had a light wash, and you'd shift it to medium if you had a medium wash, and then you'd shift it to high if you had a heavy, dirty, big wash. Well, my mother had this wash machine out in a shed at the back of the house. She called it her wash shed. And we would go in there. I would help Mother carry the clothes and so forth. I was about 5 years old probably. And we would start that old machine, and she would put the exhaust hose out the window and hang it outside the window so that the exhaust from the motor, the gasoline motor, the exhaust would go outside through that hose out the window. Well, we were in there washing clothes and talking, and pretty soon we started both getting dizzy. And before long, the next thing I remembered, I was laying in the grass beside my mother. My father had, thank God, come home early from work, and my mother and I weren't in the house. We weren't out in the yard. We weren't down the road picking berries. So he decided to look in the wash shed, and sure enough, there we were laying on the floor. We had both passed out from carbon monoxide fumes, and we were both unconscious laying on the floor. And he drug us out in the grass, and the fresh air was waking us up, and boy did we have a headache, both of us. But what had happened, Mom put the hose out the window for the exhaust, but she didn't hang it out far enough, and the weight of the hose pulled the hose back in the shed, and all the exhaust from that motor was going into that one-room shed that we were in, and we had both become poisoned by the carbon monoxide from that motor. And that was a very, very close call. But those old wash machines were something. They were very powerful. Boy, you got your clothes clean in those things. That old agitator, you'd put that in high gear, and that old agitator would go back and forth so fast, it was amazing. And then it had a ringer on it. You would stop the machine, stop the agitator. There was another lever to stop the agitator. And you'd stop the agitator, and then you would put the lever forward, and that would turn on the ringer. Now, the ringer was two rollers that were real close together, and you would stick the edge of your clothes in that ringer, and those two rollers close together would roll the water out of the clothes, and then you'd put the clothes in a clothes basket. And so that's how you would get the water out of the clothes, was to run them through the ringer. And that's where that old saying came from. I feel like I've gone through the ringer. Because if you went through the ringer, you were pretty flat. But anyway, then we took them outside to the dryer. We took the clothes out to the dryer. Now the dryer consisted of a wire running between two posts, and we would hang those clothes out on those wires, and the sunshine would dry the clothes, and it would give those clothes the most wonderful smell. They smell so clean and so fresh. When we'd gather them from the line, after the clothes were dry, we'd gather them in from the clothesline, put them in baskets, and bring them in the house. And those were the clothes dryers in those days. My wife and I had a agitator old wash machine up until we'd been married about probably 20 years. And we finally broke down and got a washer and a dryer, and that was a godsend for her. I wish we'd have done it a lot sooner. But anyway, then the next thing that was kind of unusual that we had, it would be unusual nowadays, but it was commonplace back in those days to poor farmers that were small farmers. Instead of a refrigerator, we had an ice box. It didn't have any electricity. Once a week, a man would come in a big truck, and he would take a great big, huge chunk of ice, about 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, and he would stick it up in the top shelf of that ice box. Well, whatever food you put in those 3 shelves below the ice would keep very cool, and it was a safe way to keep food. That's how you kept your food cool in those days so it wouldn't spoil. And so Mother and I would go berry picking. Back in those days, before farmers started using all those poison sprays, spraying everything, you could walk down the dirt road back of our house, and for a half a mile there was wild berries growing of all kinds. We'd walk along, in one basket we'd put gooseberries, in another basket we would put blackberries, and in another basket we'd put mulberries, and there were just berries growing all over the place. And my mother would fix the most delicious berry pies. They were wonderful. They were all from our own hand-picked wild berries, and we'd bring them in the house, stick them in the refrigerator, and then when Mom had the time, why, she would sort the berries and make the pie dough and so forth to make pies. We had an old wood cook stove, and part of my job of a little boy was to go outside and gather sticks and bring them into the house, because we had a wood cook stove. You had to put wood in the stove. It was a big iron stove, and it had a flat top, and you'd put the wood under that flat top and set it on fire, and the top of that stove would get real hot. And if you wanted to fry eggs or fry meat or whatever, you'd put your big iron skillet on the top of that stove, and it did a good job of cooking it. And if you wanted to bake pies in the oven, why, it had an oven, and it had a firebox for the oven, and you'd stick in pieces of wood, little pieces of wood and sticks and so forth in there, and set it on fire. And when it reached a certain temperature, it had a temperature gauge on it, and when it reached a certain temperature, you'd stick your pie in and bake your pie, and watch very closely. If it started getting too hot, you'd open the door a little bit to the oven. But those were very successful. We didn't have electricity at all. Of a nighttime, we would use kerosene lamps. And finally, we got a hold of the new invention, the Aladdin lamps that had these mantles in them. And they were as bright, probably, as a 60-watt light bulb. They burned kerosene, and those mantles would get white hot and glow really bright. And that's how we lit our house. And for entertainment, we would sit around this big old radio. It was probably 4 foot tall. It was made out of wood. It had speakers that were about 14 inches across, and three of them, one pointing out each side and one pointing forward. And that thing was powered by these huge batteries that we had to go once a month to buy. And we would sit there listening to programs at night like Fibber McGee and Molly, and Dagwood and Blondie, and Gangbusters, FBI, The Lone Ranger. Listen to programs like that on the radio, and you sit there and you listen to that, and you can just see that scene that they're talking about in your mind. It's like watching television in your mind, and we got a lot of enjoyment. My mother, in the daytime, she would always stop what she was doing and come in and sit down in front of the radio and turn it on and listen to a program called Queen for a Day. And that was her favorite program. And what that Queen for a Day program was, women from all over the state would go down to the radio station in this auditorium at the radio station, and it had a big audience there and everything. And the women would tell their sad tales. Like one woman would say, "Oh, my husband is paralyzed in bed, and I got to take care of him. I got 12 kids. We need money badly. We're about to lose our house," and you know, all those stories of people's hard luck, basically. Well, the audience would listen to all of those sad tales, and at the end of the show, the radio announcer, he would call out the name of each one of those women, and the audience would vote by whoever clapped the loudest, got the most people clapping the loudest, won Queen for a Day. Now, if she won Queen for a Day, she got like $500 cash, maybe a washing machine, a year's supply of soap, a whole bunch of gifts she would get. And she would be carried around in a limousine. They'd take her out to supper, her and her husband or whoever, and they'd take them out to supper, and they really treated them like a queen. And that was the Queen for a Day. It was a very, very popular show back in those days, radio show. I think almost every poor farm woman would listen to that and wish that she was queen for the day. I know my mother did, bless her heart. We were so poor. But yeah, those were days that the good Lord loved us and we loved Him. And I understand that I've got some grandchildren that I've never met. I've got 40 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. And I guess I've got some more that I didn't know about. And so I'd like to send out a hi to them, and I'm looking forward to seeing you and to meeting you. Pretty soon, if I keep having children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren at the rate I am, I'm going to be the father of my country. But anyway, I guess that's it for today, and I think next time I'm going to talk about when I was a police officer. I have some pretty rough stories about that. As a police officer, I got hurt really bad in the line of duty, and I've suffered a great deal for that. My whole family suffered because of my getting hurt as a police officer. And so anyway, for tonight, God bless you all. And remember, refuse to do wrong. The Lord told us to do that. He said, refuse to do wrong, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And love the Lord your God with all of your heart, because He loves you with all of His heart. He really does. Jesus gave up His life and died to save each and every one of us from going to hell. Now greater love hath no man than He laid down His life for his friends, and Jesus did did that for us. And he loves us with all of his heart, and we should love him back. So remember, refuse to do wrong and you'll have a happier life, because if you're going around doing wrong, it'll come back to you sooner or later. Well, God bless you all. Good night.